Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapah Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukham Te Namam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. In our last class, this is where we stopped when Swamiji says, the Hindu religion does not consist in struggles and attempts to believe a certain doctrine or dogma, but in realizing, not in believing, but in being and becoming. And that's one idea that comes throughout Swamiji's teachings, that being religious does not mean that our religious life and religious practice remains limited to visiting certain places of worship or observing certain festivals and doing some periodic ceremonies at home. Yes, that is being religious, but the complete fulfillment in life can come not merely in simply following these practices of dharma, but in actually being perfect. That's why the phrase or the sentence, religion is realization, that comes again and again in Vivekananda's teachings and also in the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. That religion can begin with faith, it can begin with certain belief, but eventually that faith and that belief has to mature into direct experience. Now, in many cases, that journey from faith to experience can go via intellectual conviction. So a lot of the scriptures that we study, whether it's the Gita, the Upanishads, to understand the philosophical basis on which this tradition is built, that gives us a certain amount of intellectual clarity, some amount of certainty, and that can be helpful. But intellectual understanding and conviction itself is not to be mistaken for experience. It's possible to have some level of intellectual understanding and have no experience at all. So there is a story told about how in one place a very learned discourse was being given on the Bhagavad Gita. And the Pandit who was explaining it was giving all the nuances of the language, the grammar, and the deep philosophical implications. And the audience, who were fairly educated, they were appreciating that whole very intellectual discourse. Now, on the outside of that hall where the discussion was going on, there was this one person sitting there who had no intellectual background at all, had never gone to school, didn't even understand Sanskrit, barely understood the language they were speaking on, but he was just sitting there outside that hall with just tears in his eyes. And then at the end of the discourse, when people came out, some of them who knew him, they were like, "What are you doing here? You are not going to understand a word of this philosophy. So what makes you so moved?" And then he says, with folded hand, he said, "You're right. I really didn't understand a word of what was being said. All I know is that there is some satsang, some discussion is going on in the Gita. And when I think of the Gita, before my mind, I see the figure of Krishna. And I see him explaining this philosophy to Arjuna. I don't understand a word of that philosophy, but I'm actually seeing Krishna teaching. And that's why I just cannot stop these tears of bhakti coming. Now that's the difference between an intellectual understanding and a direct experience. And what Swamiji is saying here is that our religious life or our spiritual life will reach its fulfillment when it is not limited merely to intellectual conviction, but to direct experience. That is what he meant by saying, but in realizing, not in believing, but in being and becoming. So let's continue. This is on page 22. Thus, the whole object of their system is by constant struggle to become perfect, to become divine, to reach God and see God. And this reaching God, seeing God, becoming perfect, even as the Father in heaven is perfect, constitutes the religion of the Hindus. So this is something Sister Nivedita, in the introduction to the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, she said that when Swami Vivekananda rose to speak at the Parliament of Religions, he was there as a representative of Hinduism, and so he rose ostensibly to speak about the religious ideas of Hindus. But when he finished speaking, when he had presented this paper, she says Hinduism had been created. Now what she means is that Hinduism is such an ancient tradition that its extent and the number of ideas and the number of approaches are so extensive, it's so mind-boggling that no Hindu who can ever claim that I know all about Hinduism. I know every aspect of Hinduism. It's just impossible. Nor are we expected to know everything. And because there was no one central controlling organizational authority within Hinduism, the tradition itself is pretty much scattered. And one of the great achievements of Swami Vivekananda was, especially in the lectures that he gave when he returned to India, was to discover or to describe what he said were the common basis of Hinduism, common factors of Hinduism. In the Indian subcontinent, we know that there are so many languages, that's well known. So it's possible that it's impossible, first of all, to know all the languages of India, even if someone is originally from India. One might know one's own language and maybe, if you have had some exposure, maybe 2 or 3 languages. To know 3 or 4 languages, which seems pretty common in India, it seems pretty incredible to many people in other parts of the world. But nevertheless, none of us can claim we know every language. So we know that certain parts of India, when people go from one part to the other part, it will be totally unintelligible. Well, nowadays, of course, there is the national language, and there's English and Hindi, and so we can make ourselves intelligible, but we may not understand the local language at all. We also know that festivals, although there are common festivals like Diwali and Holi and so on, but there are also regional festivals. And even these common festivals are not necessarily celebrated in exactly the same way in different parts of India. Oftentimes, although we speak about the Gita and the Upanishad and so on, I think only a minority of practicing Hindus actually read the Gita or actually read the Upanishads. Numerically, the people who read the Gita, the Upanishad is small. A majority of the people might get to know about the tradition probably from the stories of the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Puranas, or the things that their parents and grandparents have told them about the different family traditions. That's how most people come to know about their tradition. The rituals also, the way a puja is done, there is no one universal way in which it's done. The way it's done in the north, in the east and south, again, there are lots of variations. And so the challenge is, all of these people self-identify as Hindus, but their language is different, their rituals are different, their festivals are different, their way they dress is different. There are lots of differences. And so what is the common thing that makes all of these people think that they belong to the same tradition? And so one of the things that Swami Vivekananda did was to point out these common factors, that these are the things to which all Hindus agree, and what those things are. Some of those things we have already seen at this, and some more will come. And so the reason Sister Nivedita said that when Vivekananda ended his presentation at the Parliament of Religions, Hinduism had been created, what she meant was that for those of us, our present generation, in the last 100 or plus years since the time Vivekananda came, he redefined to us of what Hinduism is, to those who are already Hindus now, or those who want to know about Hinduism. He redefined it for a clearer understanding for those of us in the 20th and 21st century. And so one of the things he emphasizes is that to be a Hindu is more than simply going to a Hindu temple and doing a Hindu worship or reading some Hindu books. What it primarily implies is to reach God, to see God, and to reaching God, seeing God, becoming perfect, that constitutes the religion of the Hindus. So that he puts before us as the real goal of the Hindu tradition. Let's continue. And what becomes of a man when he attains perfection? He lives a life of bliss, infinite. He enjoys infinite and perfect bliss, having obtained the only thing in which man ought to have pleasure, namely God, and enjoys the bliss with God. So that's the goal of life. If one wants to know, what will I get if I practice spiritual life? Where will it all end? Now, if we don't have any spiritual background, for most people, life ends with death. Death is the end. And many people who will say, well, what happens after death? Who knows? Some people might say, well, they say, we'll go to some place. Call it heaven or hell or Chandraloka, Suryaloka. There are lots of lokas mentioned in the Hindu text. And then there is a whole theology worked out on that. What happens according to karma, one goes there. If it's good karma, you will have happiness. If there's bad karma, you will have sorrow. And then that karma is worked out, one has to be reborn again, and then go through this whole cycle, again go somewhere, and again come back. So it can just go on. That's why it's called samsara chakra. Samyak sarati iti samsaraha. That which is constantly changing, constantly moving, that which never remains constant, that which never remains steady. So that's samsara. And chakra means a circle. Just as the circle has no beginning and no end, as long as we are a part of samsara, we just have to go round and round and round. Now, if at some point we get tired of going round, and you say, well, I want to get out of it. If we want to get out of it, then that is what spiritual life can do. And getting out means, as Swamiji says, it means enjoying infinite and perfect bliss. It means to be with God and enjoy the bliss with God. So if we at some point feel that the joy and bliss I get in my daily life is not good enough, because this joy that I get never remains permanent. The joy, the sukha that I get now always is followed by some kind of a tension, stress, worry. And then when that becomes too much, nature gives us a little bit of a joy. It's almost, you can think about it, it's almost like a torture. It's like you are torturing a little child and kind of beating the child, and the child is crying. And then you feel, okay, now just let's have a little rest. Then you give that child some rasagulla or some laddu or something. And then the child says, then it's enjoying it. And then as long as the child is enjoying that sweet, that all that pain is forgotten because now a sweet is given. And as soon as that laddu ends, then once again go with the stick and start beating it. Now that seems like a very bizarre kind of a picture. But in some sense, that is what's happening in our own lives. Because we know our life is, we just go back and forth. There are some good things happening in our life, some wonderful experiences we have. So nature gives us something to be happy about. But when we start relishing that happiness, we know that it doesn't, we would like it to last forever, but it doesn't. Then something happens, and some tension, some worry, some crisis. And then all that joy goes and we become worried and we have to run here and there, try to solve the problem. And that's very stressful. Sometimes people don't get sleep and so on. And then when that reaches a certain tipping point, then something good happens again. And so that's how we go. So, and if someone were to tell us, this is how it's going to be through eternity. If you are happy with this process, that, little bit of joy will come. So I don't mind some pain, okay, because I know some joy will come, but I will not be able to enjoy that joy enough because, some pain is going to come. So at some point, if at all we say, now this arrangement is not satisfactory, I want a joy that will never go away. I want a kind of joy that will never be punctuated by some suffering. Then spiritual life says, then you have to get out of the circle. And once we get out of the circle, we are just in bliss, enjoying that bliss with God. And that is what spiritual life can do for us. Now, what does it mean, enjoying that bliss with God? Now, in a manner that might be intelligible to a child, we could say, well, it means God lives in heaven, Vishnu lives in Vaikuntha, Shiva lives in Kailash, so devotees of Vishnu will go to Vaikuntha, there is Vishnu there, and then you just be there in the presence of Vishnu. Just being in the presence of God gives you all the joy. And then if you're hungry, all the others are there ready. Just have to think about it and food will come. Anyway, you get the point that could be one way we can understand being in the presence of God. And that's what Swamiji will address now. So what does it really mean to get out of the circle? And are there different ways to think about it? So that's he discusses in the next paragraph. So far, all the Hindus are agreed. This is the common religion of all the sects of India. But then perfection is absolute, and the absolute cannot be 2 or 3. It cannot have any qualities. It cannot be an individual. And so, when a soul becomes perfect and absolute, it must become one with Brahman, and it would only realize the Lord as the perfection, the reality of its own nature and existence, the existence absolute, knowledge absolute, and bliss absolute. We have often and often read this called the losing of individuality and becoming a stock or a stone. He jests at scars that never felt a wound. I tell you, it is nothing of the kind. Anyone knows where this quote is from? He jests at scars that never felt a wound. Okay, this is from Shakespeare. Swami Vivekananda has quoted Shakespeare quite a number of times in many of his lectures and writings. So this actually comes in the play Romeo and Juliet. And he just said scars that never felt a wound. So there is this friend of Romeo who is making fun. So Romeo was in love with a girl before he met Juliet. And so this friend of his is kind of trying to make fun, passing kind of frivolous comments. And then this is what the thought in Romeo's mind. So he says, he just said scars. That means this friend who is trying to tease him. So what Romeo says is, that friend has no idea about what love means, what love is. And so therefore, he can make fun of something of which he has no personal experience. And that's what he means by he jests at scars. So one who has never had a wound can make fun about scars that people have. But once if someone has actually experienced something, a wound, then they know that a scar involves some pain and suffering. And it won't be then so easy to be frivolous about it. And so this is a quote from Shakespeare. And why Swamiji is quoting it here is because this idea that freedom means becoming one with that joy absolute, that existence absolute. Freedom means all the duality goes away. Freedom, think about it in a dualistic sense. It's so beautiful. The Lord is sitting on the throne, you're sitting in front, and the Gandharvas are playing this divine music. It's kind of easier to imagine, and it's wonderful. And compare that with everything is one. There is no duality. You are not. There is a song of this great poet called Ram Prasad in Bengali. So there are many songs he has written, and one of the songs that Ram Prasad wrote ends with this: that address to the Divine Mother. He was a great devotee of the Divine Mother. So Ram Prasad writes, "Oh Mother, I don't want to become sugar. I want to eat sugar. Because when you're eating sugar, you can enjoy the sweetness. Now, becoming sugar, well, who knows whether sugar is able to enjoy its own sweetness? We don't know. But for us, it's like, well, eating sugar is much better than just becoming sugar. So essentially, that is what is the idea here, that becoming free, getting out of this samsara, really means you're not really, you can say you are in bliss, but essentially, since there is nothing else, you have become one with bliss. You have become bliss. You are the bliss absolute, because that is all that exists. And someone would say, well, if there is nothing else to enjoy, then what's the point? It's like the wall that cannot enjoy anything. So how can that experience be enjoyable if there is nothing else other than me? So that's what he said. The people who criticize like this are these, he just said, scars that never felt a wound, because they have never had any experience of what it means to experience that absolute. And that is why they can make fun of it in this way. And therefore Swamiji says, I tell you, it is nothing of the kind. If it is happiness to enjoy the consciousness of this small body, it must be greater happiness to enjoy the consciousness of two bodies, the measure of happiness increasing with the consciousness of an increasing number of bodies. The aim, the ultimate happiness being reached when it would become a universal consciousness. Therefore, to gain this infinite universal individuality, this miserable little prison individuality must go. Then alone can death cease when I am one with life. Then alone can misery cease when I am one with happiness itself. Then alone can all errors cease when I am one with knowledge itself. And this is the necessary scientific conclusion. Science has proved to me that physical individuality is a delusion, that really my body is one little continuously changing body in an unbroken ocean of matter. And Advaita, or unity, is the necessary conclusion with my other counterpart, soul. Now, this idea comes in many writings of Swamiji, that while we might say that, well, my body is different from the bodies of other people. It's different from this table and the chair. So every entity is separate. But think about it at the material level. My body belongs to this material world. It's made up of particles of matter. You know the chemical composition of the human body. You know there are atoms and molecules and all of that. That is true with every physical body, living or non-living in this world. Now, are we really separate? Because there is no vacuum in between. Well, there is air. Now, air is also made up of atoms and molecules. So there is really no gap between this. So at the quantum level, as they sometimes say, this is just one big ocean of matter. And just as in an ocean, certain parts of ocean, if they have a specific density and a specific form and a specific function of moving, we give them a specific name. We say, oh, this is a wave, and this is this, and these are like whirlpool. We can give this name, but essentially, that is the same body of water taken some specific forms and specific way it moves. So similarly, in this big ocean of matter, when certain atoms and molecules come together, are held together by a certain force, they take a certain form. Well, if it takes what we have conventionally come to accept as a human form, we say, well, that's a human being. If the same atoms and molecules take the form of a four-legged creature, which we have come to now believe is a dog, we say that is a dog. But essentially, if you burn a human body and burn a dog, what remains is just two heaps of ashes. And you can never distinguish which ash is whose. So ultimately, when you break it down to the constituent parts, you cannot know which is which. So that even physically, we are not separate. Now we can use the same analogy about our minds as well. We might think, well, I have my mind, you have your mind, and everyone has their own mind. But just as the body, the physical body, there is this ocean of ideas, this subtle, very subtle ocean. And there is a certain part of this ocean which I appropriate as my own and say, oh, this is my mind, that's your mind. Because think about it this way, just as inside the ocean, while the waves are different, the water that these waves carry, that water is continuously being shared. Water from one wave, after some time, becomes part of another wave. The matter is continually being interchanged among the waves. Similarly, now, through conversations or through many different ways, what I see as my ideas, I'm now sharing it with everyone. And those who are listening, and if that idea resonates with them, then that becomes their idea. And then they'll go and tell that to their friends, not necessarily always saying, oh, this is this person's idea. It becomes my idea. In fact, there's a lot of research done that how we take ownership of certain kinds of thinking. And it's a little bit like this. When people sit on say, at a breakfast or lunch or a coffee table with their friends, and they start discuss whether it's games or politics, and then, well, politics, one, for instance, is a very current hot topic. And everyone has some views about, well, what's going on or how things should be. And a lot of time people can very ferociously say, this is what I think. Now, they are very sincere when they say, this is what I believe, this is what I think. Now, they have actually done research on this, and they have found a lot of our discussions are triggered by something you have heard in the news in the morning, or saw something on television, or read somewhere. And then if it is something that which already kind of resonates with your way of thinking, then you say, yeah, that makes sense. So now, you have got an idea of some other person, either through an article or through a podcast or somewhere, and then it somehow strikes a chord in your heart, and then you say, yeah, that makes sense. So then when you're having a discussion with someone, you are now, that's become your idea now, because it makes sense to you. And so you then use that in a part of your conversation. That's how. Now, there's nothing wrong or bad about this. All that I'm saying is, the ideas, feelings, etc. are continually being interchanged between different minds, just like the water, even at the physical level. If you go buy an apple from a market and then you eat it, well, an apple tree somewhere which was planted by some person, that particles of matter were later shipped and brought to that shop. You went and bought it, and now those particles have become part of your body. So even at the material level, matter is continually being interchanged and exchanged. That is true at the level of ideas as well. That's why in these olden days, certainly in the times of the Gita and the Upanishad, the idea of intellectual property didn't exist. Because in fact, the Upanishad called the Isha Upanishad, it has this phrase called Kasya Swid Dhanam. He says, to whom does anything belong? A lot of time we might say, oh, this is my house, this is my home, or this is my this. And then we quickly realize, well, before I was born, someone else lived there. And after I die, if that house is still standing, someone else is going to live there. So it's a temporary residence. But somehow I see this is mine. Same is true with regard to ideas. And so sometimes, again, this is, it's kind of good to reflect a little bit on it. And what does an original idea mean? Original thinking mean? So when you speak about an original idea, original thinking, that does not necessarily mean that no one has ever thought about it, that I'm the first person in this creation to have thought about it. Because I doubt very much there's anything left for us now to think originally. We have just, we have been around for millions and billions of years. Even in Vedanta, when we ask questions, we can be very certain someone at some point, at some level, has already asked that question and someone has already answered it. So it's very difficult to even ask an original question. So, but what does original thinking mean? So it doesn't mean that no one has thought about it. It simply means that I have arrived at that way of thinking through putting together the ideas that have come to me from various sources with my own effort. It's not as if I read something this morning and I'm just verbatim repeating it. Then it's not original. But if I've got, say, 10 different ideas from 10 different places, and I process those ideas and kind of arrange them, and then we'll say, well, then that's original. Although someone else might have done exactly the same thing somewhere and you are not aware of it. So original does not necessarily mean that you are the first one to do it, but that you arrived at it through your own effort. That's one way to think about it. So the idea here is that science has proved to me that the physical individuality is a delusion, that really my body is one little continuously changing body in an unbroken ocean of matter. So that's what Swamiji is saying here. So there's just an unbroken ocean of matter. Our minds are an unbroken ocean of ideas. And then in the same way, we can think about consciousness as well. One thing, I have my consciousness, in your consciousness, and your consciousness. It's this unbroken ocean of consciousness. And that is why we have these terms about the cosmic mind, the cosmic body, the Virat Purusha, looking upon this entire, the physical universe as the physical body of this cosmic person. It's called Virat. And that's the experience Ramakrishna had when he used to do puja at the Divine Mother's Temple in Calcutta. And then, of course, for puja you need flowers. So he used to go in the morning, go pluck flowers for the puja. Then one morning, when he went out to pluck flowers, he just couldn't do it because he saw that this entire universe is just one big altar. And all of these, so we bring flowers and put it in a flower vase like this. But now, if you're seeing the entire world as one big altar of the Lord, then every tree is already a flower vase. So why would you want to take a flower which is already there before the presence of the Lord? So he says he was no longer able to pluck flowers again. Once he tried to take a bilva leaf from a tree, and while he was taking, a little bit, sometime when you try to take up the leaf, a little bit part of the stem might come out, and he just felt the pain as if someone had plucked a hair out of his own body. Now that's what is that cosmic Virat Purusha means. Now as an idea we can understand, but we can see from the example of Ramakrishna as also many other mystics that this is not simply kind of a very poetic idea, that this is something that they have actually experienced. And once we get an experience of this, then helping someone becomes very different in our own mind. Then I'm not helping anybody else because everything is a continuation of my own body. So if I now, if my left hand is hurt and I try to then heal it, try to do something about it, I don't say, oh, this hand's, I'm doing service to you. You can't say that. Well, this is just me. So now if I'm seeing this entire world as just my body, then, well, what service? It's just like one hand taking care of another hand. Now, if I see the whole thing is one mind, then again, the idea of service gets completely revolutionized. And then, of course, going at the level of consciousness, we see that entire thing is one conscious being. And that's the ideal, that's the goal that Swamiji is referring to here. Okay, let me read the next two para, then we will stop. Science is nothing but the finding of unity. As soon as science would reach perfect unity, it would stop from further progress because it would reach the goal. Thus, chemistry could not progress farther when it would discover one element out of which all others could be made. Physics would stop when it would be able to fulfill its services in discovering one energy of which all the others are but manifestations. And the science of religion becomes perfect when it would discover Him who is the one life in a universe of death. Him who is the constant basis of an ever-changing world. One who is the only soul of which all souls are but delusive manifestations. Thus is it, through multiplicity and duality, that the ultimate unity is reached. Religion can go no further. This is the goal of all science. All science is bound to come to this conclusion in the long run. Manifestation and not creation is the word of science today. And the Hindu is only glad that what he has been cherishing in his bosom for ages is going to be taught in more forcible language and with further light from the latest conclusions of science. In fact, in other place, Swamiji says that Vedanta has reached that unity and science is still in some sense struggling towards it. Because right now we have matter and energy. We know that they are interchangeable, and at some level, science is struggling to find that one, that unity. What is that one from which everything has come? And we'll see. The way it gets described is very different. That unity Vedanta finds in consciousness. Science does use the word consciousness, at least many scientists do, but that's consciousness as it is used in material sciences is thought of as some kind of something that emerged at some point during evolution. And so while the word used is the same, the understanding of the word consciousness in material sciences and in spiritual sciences is very different. So we'll stop here today. So if you have any thoughts, ideas, questions, feel free to share and to ask. Yeah.
Swami Vivekananda talks about how religion is being, not doing. Yet, when I'm wondering how to have more direct experience of God, I'm not sure how to frame the question without asking in this way, where my question is, what can I do to achieve more direct experience of God?
Yes, what we need to do is to realize that we are not doing anything. So, let me put it this way. Religion means being myself. And we don't need to do anything to be ourselves because we are already that. The problem now is we have apparently become somebody else. And so what I'm doing is trying to see how I can stop being someone else. And that is what I need to do. Stop being someone else. Because that I don't have to do anything to be myself. It's a little bit like, let's say there is a source of light. And that source of light, let's say there is a candle here. And now I've covered that candle with this. Now I say, well, I want light. What do I need to do to bring light? Now, I don't need to bring light because the light is already there. So I don't have to do anything to bring light. But I still need to do something to remove the obstruction to that light. So if I remove the obstacle, light is already there. So that's what I need to do. So what Vedanta says is, I'm a divine being. I'm pure and perfect. I don't need to do anything to be pure and perfect. I don't need to do anything to be a Brahman. I'm already Brahman. Now the problem is, I have apparently become somebody else. I have now become a human being. I have become a very mortal creature. So somebody has put this over me. So I've become now a human being. So now what my doing is, I have to remove this. And then I am who I am. Does that make sense? So I have to do things to realize that I'm not doing anything. That sounds like a very Zen-like statement. Yeah.
So Swamiji, related to that last question, you mentioned samsara chakra, the samsara chakra, like the circle of samsara. So in that analogy, then I guess the thing is, the body and the mind can continue to move in that samsara chakra, but we just need to detach ourselves from our body and mind. So we can step out of the samsara chakra by just seeing what's going on in the chakra, but not identifying with it. Is that how you become free? You basically, things will go on in the world, but you just don't identify with them.
Yes, if I stop identifying with it, then the body and mind will not survive.
Oh.
So for the physical survival, you need identification. And that's why, for instance now, if I stop identifying with the body and mind, then I'm not going to feel hunger and thirst. If I don't feel hunger and thirst, I'm not going to drink water, I'm not going to eat anything. Then this body and mind is going to go. And so it doesn't then, there is no question of it going anywhere because I'm not identifying with it. So for the body and mind to move, I have to be identified with it. If I'm not identified with it, then the body and mind cannot move on its own. So the identification of my consciousness with the body and mind is what animates the body and mind. If I stop identifying with it, then it doesn't move. Now, this is the stage we come to very often in life. Now, from the perspective of the enlightened being, finished. That enlightened being realizes there's one with absolute, there's nothing. But now, from the perspective of the rest of us, we are still seeing each other, and we are also seeing an enlightened being. So when we see a person who has become enlightened, so means, from our understanding, that person has stopped identifying. But we still see that person is moving amongst us. Then we say, well, if that person has stopped identifying, how is that person eating food and sleeping, and we see Ramakrishna joking and pretty much doing everything the way we do. And so therefore then we have to find a way to figure it out and how that happens. And that's when the idea of prarabdha karma comes in. That, well, as long as the karma that gave rise to this body, as long as that momentum is, the body will still continue to function. Or sometimes we also see that these people continue to live in order to teach the world. So we have to figure out some explanation from our perspective of how we see. But otherwise, if you stopped identifying, then it's gone.
And is that the goal, Swamiji? To stop identifying and then have that?
Because all of the problems that people experience in life are connected with the body and mind. If I'm not connected with the body and mind, I have no problems. And actually, in some bizarre sort of way, we are like not exactly free, but kind of come close to it every night when we are fast asleep. That's not freedom, because we are still terribly ignorant. They say if a stupid person goes to sleep, a stupid person wakes up. But if a stupid person goes into samadhi, a sage will come out of it. So sleep and samadhi are different, that's true. But in some sense, we could say, in our present unenlightened state, the closest we come to that experience of not identifying with the body and mind is in the state of deep sleep. And in the state of deep sleep, therefore, we have no worries, no problem, no aches, nothing. But of course, we can't stay in that state. If science could find a way for someone to stay in deep sleep forever, then we don't need enlightenment. But we can't. Our karma will wake us up in the morning. And so that's the idea. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Swamiji, it seems that the whole thing is because one became many. Mm-hmm. That's where the many have thought that they are not one and all, because we differentiate ourselves and we are going into mass. I think most of the time it has been answered that we don't know why one became many.
Actually, we know.
But I think even in the lecture, Swamiji says that Hindu says we don't know.
Yeah.
But why somebody who has realized, why can't they easily tell why one became many?
That question cannot be answered because that question assumes that one has become the many. It's a little bit like think about it this way. If someone has maybe taken some drugs or something, or is got hallucinating, okay? If some person is hallucinating and is just seeing snakes everywhere, now if that person asks a friend, why are there snakes everywhere here? And the other person is not hallucinating. So that person says, there are no snakes here. Why are you not answering my question? You have got eyes, I've got eyes, I'm seeing snakes. How did these snakes come? Then you say, well, they're gone. He said, but how did they come? Now, what? You cannot answer that question because there are no snakes there. So if you tell that person, oh, there are no snakes here, that person is not going to believe you. So then you will have to cook up some story and say, the snakes, maybe there's some construction work going on and the ground has been bulldozed and all the snakes have come out. And then what do you need to do? And then you kind of tell him to do something about it. And one thing you can tell him is like somehow just get over that hangover of whatever is hallucinating it. And then the snakes will disappear. And then, now the snakes are gone. That's the problem. Because when we are asking the question, how did this many come from the one? We are like the person saying, how did all these snakes come? And for an enlightened being, there is no many. And so one way they can tell you is, there is no many. And then you're going to say, are you kidding me? Every morning I wake up and I'm seeing many. So that's the reality of my life. And therefore then you have to have, then this Panchikaranam, and then this ignorance came, and then Panchamahabhutas. And so you have to kind of have a story about how this many came. And that story is created in order for me to know, if I can know how I got into the mess, then I will know a way to get out of it. We are all like Abhimanyu in Mahabharata. That Chakravyuha, Abhimanyu knew how to get in, he just didn't know how to get out. So we have successfully got inside this samsara, and now we don't know how to get out. That's the thing. So, but it's also possible to say, one way we can understand how many came from one, from our own experience in life. Let's say I'm all alone at home, and I have a good dinner. I'm all alone. I am just one person at home. I have my dinner and I go to sleep. And then, of course, when I sleep, I start dreaming. Now, in the dream, I see myself and I see so many other people. Now, that time I don't remember in my dream that I was really all alone in my room. Because if I remember that in my dream, I can ask that question. I was alone. How did all these people come suddenly? And the only answer is, I fell asleep. And feeling asleep means I forgot who I was, I forgot where I was. That's why dream became possible. So one way you can understand this one becoming many is that Brahman, this one infinite reality, fell asleep. Brahman forgot, I am Brahman. Brahman forgot, I am infinite. And then, of course, in the dream, Brahman became finite. The divine being became a human being. And that's how the many have come. And the only way to end the dream is to wake up. So, many has come from that one because the one fell asleep. If the many has to go, that one has to wake up. And you are that one.
Thank you, Swami.
Yes.
Swamiji, in that same frame of thinking, if all I can say is that if all I can vouch for is my existence, then everything else is just hallucination, right? Including Vedanta, including enlightened beings.
Absolutely.
Then why should I believe in any of that? If everything is a hallucination, all I can say is I exist, right?
Correct. But you need to believe in that because it is from them that you have even heard this insight. It's not come like you suddenly thought it up yourself. So it's like this. If in your dream, some wise person comes and tells you in your dream, you are dreaming. This is the dream. Wake up. That person is telling you the truth. You can't then, in your dream, you can't say, oh, this is only a dream. I don't believe you. So you see, so that there could be parts of your hallucination which could show you the way out of it. It's like a person in your dream, somebody in your dream coming and telling you, this is a dream. And so you cannot dismiss that statement as just a dream, and because it works. Because everything in dream works. If you are, for instance, if you are thirsty in your dream, the water that you drink in your dream does quench your thirst. You can't say, it's a hallucination, I don't believe in that water. Well, you believe in that thirst, you believe in that water. So now, if you believe that you are hallucinating, then you should believe in something that will help you get out of that hallucination. Does that make sense? And of course, once you become enlightened, once you wake up, everything goes. The Vedanta goes and you don't need anything because you're woken up. And that's why the Vedas themselves say, Tatra Vedaha Aveda Bhavanti. Once you become enlightened, Vedas become non-Vedas. You don't need books anymore. As Shri Ramakrishna said, that when you want to go shopping, you've got a bunch of things to buy and you're afraid that you might forget them all, sometimes you make a list, a grocery list. These are the things I need to buy. And then when you go to the grocery store, one by one you say, okay, I got this, I got this, I got this. Once you have gotten everything, you don't then take that list at home and worship it. You say, well, I don't need it anymore. So Vedas are like a grocery list. It tells you like, do this, do this. Once you have done it, then you don't need the Vedas anymore. But until I have done it, this may be a part of a greater delusion, but this will help me. And so Ramakrishna sometimes use this phrase called Vidya Maya and Avidya Maya. So a water that I drink in my dream is not real, but that water, if it's going to help quench my thirst, I need it. So if there are some good things in my dream which will help me become stronger, healthier, I need them. I don't have to throw them away just because they are dreaming things.
So I guess Swamiji is saying proof is that when we see a positive change in that deluded world, we are still improving, which means that it is working, which is why we need to stay on that path.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Mahendra.
Swamiji, what you just said about that you heard of Maslow, the psychologist, who says that if you kind of like satisfy your basic needs, then you can go to the next step above. And when you kind of go up with those sort of things. So is that like the human beings as we are right now versus an enlightened being that comes into this world and it's already right at the peak, but we are still trying to meet our basic needs so that we can, obviously not being greedy, but satisfy before we can get to that. A hungry man who is not yet been able to feed himself or herself would not be able to sort of think about God at this stage or spirituality.
Sure, I mean, that's true. So some of the very basic needs are usually needed to be fulfilled, because if I'm dying of hunger, very difficult to think of God that time. That's why they say no religion on empty stomach, but no religion on an overfilled stomach either, right? So the distinction between basic need and indulgence or overindulgence, that's a kind of a thin line. And so, it just depends on our understanding of basic. But also, if there is this intense longing for something, then sometimes those basic needs may not appear as basic as we think. Sometimes even in some scientific research, if somebody is deeply engrossed in some experiment, and that experiment might need your presence, you cannot leave your lab for some time, that person may not even worry like, oh, I'm feeling thirsty or I need to go and eat something. Sometimes it will be so engrossed in it, you may not even remember that you haven't had your lunch. There are, I think it was it Louis Pasteur or something, one of the scientists, that he was so engrossed, he was going to be married that day. Everyone is waiting at the church, and he has forgotten that that's his wedding day. And he is like deeply engrossed in some experiment, and people are like searching for him everywhere. So, again, the extent of our focus on something, might get so much absorbed into it that some of the things which others might think as very basic may not be so needed. And so that's what we see. I mean, many people for whom were consumed by this extreme longing for God, they didn't worry about where the next meal will come from. But by and large, it's true that for most people, some basic needs need to be met in order for spiritual life to even begin. That's true. Yeah.
One just last comment on the science and religion when Swamiji talked about it. I guess now, after at least 100 years later, after science has moved to some extent where not yet come to that point where they can recognize, but the whole particle accelerators where they're trying to discover the smallest particle. And I think the Higgs particle that was discovered about a few years ago, the scientist who's named after that, he said that that's the God particle.
God particle, yeah.
And it's kind of like, I guess that probably still science will go from a physical way to the other way to find out.
Yeah, well, hopefully, yes. I mean, I think my comment on that is simply this, that if we envision a convergence of science as we understand today to Vedantic insight, it'll be more than an incremental convergence through some of these experiments. At some point, there has to be a reckoning in terms of a basic worldview. By that I mean, now my understanding of science is fairly limited, but my understanding is this. Material science, as we see it today, and all the experiments it does, is based on the assumption that there is something out there which is being measured, which we are trying to figure out, whether this particle, that particle, and everything, that's fine. But there is this idea that there is something out there which I'm trying to figure out what it is. That is not what Vedanta is saying. So for the convergence to occur, at some point either Vedanta has to say, we got it wrong, that there was really some God particle out there, or science has to say, what we thought was out there was probably not out there. To put it like in a different way, would be Vedanta says that, well, let me say what for science says first. Science says, I'm able to see this object because it is here. If it were not here, I wouldn't see it. So I see it because it is there. And what Vedanta says is, it is there because I see it. And that's a very radically different way. So that's why the convergence cannot occur until this basic dichotomy has to go. And so the phrase in Sanskrit, they call it Ajnata Satta. Ajnata Satta means do things, and we talked about it in one of our earlier classes, that do things exist if I'm not aware of them? And science would say, in its present thinking, that I need not be aware of things, but things can exist. And the Vedantic position, in its highest non-dualistic abstraction, is that no, existence of anything is directly correlated with my own consciousness. And I think that's where there isn't a convergence yet. So that thing will stop at that point. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhuhu. On Sunday, we will have Antar Yoga. As usual, we'll have readings by members, a reflection, music, and we'll also celebrate the birthdays of everyone born in the month of December. So there'll be a big cake and there'll be soup. So all of you are welcome for Antar Yoga on Sunday at 11. And we will continue this study next Wednesday at 7:30. And then our meditation will be held as usual at 6 o'clock in the evening. And as I've mentioned before, the season in which we are entering, if there is a lot of snow, if commute is difficult, if there is a storm, please take a look at the center's website before you come, and just to make sure that the program is not cancelled because of. Generally, if there is just a mild snow, we will go ahead. But if there is a storm and if there is a commute is dangerous, then we sometimes cancel the program. So please take a look. Verify from the website if you have a doubt about the program on the day. So let's conclude with the prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.